Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of The Housemaid, a Korean movie from 2010 that stars Do-yeon and Jung-jae. This is a remake of Kim Ki-young's 1960 film of the same name, and I just reviewed the original a few weeks ago, I believe, so I felt like revisiting the remake. The film opens with a bustling city street where a young woman commits suicide by jumping from a building ledge. Eun-yi, who works in a restaurant, persuades her coworker and roommate to accompany her to the scene of the suicide, and she stands, distraught, over the chalk outline where the woman's body had lain. The next morning, an older woman named Byeong-sik visits her small apartment and later expresses interest in giving her a job. She's hired as a live-in assistant for Hae-ra, who is pregnant with twins, as well as her rich husband, Hoon. Eun-yi's primary task is watching the couple's young daughter, Nami, who gradually warms to her, and the husband begins to secretly flirt with this housemaid, enticing her with glasses of wine and his piano playing. But this potential affair could ignite conflict within the household. So the opening scene is actually quite lively. I like it. You get this bustling street, lots of people at night, partying, partaking in local cuisine via food stalls and stuff. I found it to be a nice little showcasing of Korean street culture. But once our protagonist gets hired and moves into the home, we get a feel for the characters and their interrelationships. The wife is actually very young and attractive, and her focus is basically producing as many children as possible. Jung-jae's character, the father, is very laid back and suave, although his sexual needs are not being met during his wife's pregnancy. The older lady of the house, played by Eun-yi, who's been in a bunch of stuff, she has a long history in this home and seems to be annoyed by the father's presence. Actually, she seems to be annoyed by everyone's presence in this house, probably for reasons. And then you get the little kid, who's super proper and polite, seems to have no fun, is emotionally muted. So the vibe within this house is a bit stiff and formal, with a little bit of, animosity already in there. In addition, this family is very wealthy, which becomes obvious when you realize that this house is essentially a mansion. And it's huge. And even their espresso machine is freaking awesome. So that residence and lifestyle helps to accentuate this sterile environment. So we have this stuffy situation in place, but our main protagonist, the new housemaid, actually adds some warmth to the place, unbelievably. She bonds with the little girl, and she has a cheery personality, at least sometimes. And that's your setup, which has some general similarities to the 1960 original film, but there are many differences you'll notice. And just from what I've said already, there's a bunch of differences that you'll notice if you've seen the original film. This was a good decision by the filmmakers because The Housemaid from 2010 distinguishes itself from its predecessor, almost to the point of being a completely different film. The premise is similar, you get some stuff that happens that's similar, but overall, it's a different experience. So, for example, the housemaid herself does create a problem for the family unit eventually. But there's another side character who enters the mix here later on that becomes the main catalyst that turns the situation into something much more volatile. Also, the husband in this film has far less screen time than the original and also has less impact on the course of events. So this film is primarily a rivalry between the ladies of the house, which is different. Well, somewhat different. And I would say this is a good quality flick, legit acting from an A-list cast for sure. Some good dialogue. I like some of the discussions about, what it's like to be married to a rich, successful man. Some of the, the small wording in a contract, where you have this marriage, but there's certain things you have to allow him to do, the fine print, so to speak, even though it might not be moral. So I kind of like that. They had kind of a practical application to, a high profile marriage. And then you get some impressive traditional filmmaking qualities. I like some of the camera shots specifically. There's one shot that I think is one of the best in the film, and this is pretty nicely directed. There's a shot with Jung-jae in the middle of the screen with his wife to the left, like sitting in a chair, and then the housemaid in the bathroom cleaning like the bathroom. And it's all in one shot, and you can kind of see him kind of eyeing up the housemaid while still trying to make sure his wife wasn't watching him. I kind of like that scene. It was pretty cool. There's a lot of exquisite architecture and even a few snowy outdoor shots. There are a few pretty graphic sex scenes during the opening half, just so you know. But if there's a main criticism I have of this one, it's that the remake is less plot-based than the original, and the pacing is a little slower. You know, one of the distinguishing features of The Housemaid, the original, was that it was eventful and almost kind of sensationalistic. This version is less so, unbelievably. You know, despite the sex scenes, this is more laid back. And it does lack some of the more purely entertaining aspects that the original had. That does limit it to a degree, but The Housemaid 2010 is a good movie. I recommend it. It's currently available streaming on AMC+. You could also rent it on Google Play. And as always, I'll see you next time.